All right, so yesterday, just a few hours after being sworn in, U.S. President Donald Trump began signing a series of executive orders. One of those set in motion a plan to designate Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. That's what we're going to talk about today, essentially what that means, the tools that it unlocks for the U.S. government, as well as reactions and opinions from the right and left side of the political spectrum here in the United States, and then what to keep an eye out for in this regard going forward. So starting out, just diving into the actual text of the executive order, because we have that to go off of, it says, quote, "The cartels have engaged in a campaign of violence and terror throughout the Western Hemisphere that has not only destabilized countries with significant importance to our national interests, but also flooded the United States with deadly drugs, violent criminals, and vicious gangs. The cartels functionally control, through a campaign of assassination, terror, rape, and brute force, nearly all illegal traffic across the southern border of the United States. In certain portions of Mexico, they function as quasi-government entities, controlling nearly all aspects of society. The cartel's activities threaten the safety of the American people, the security of the United States, and the stability of the international order in the Western Hemisphere. Their activities, proximity to, and incursions into the physical territory of the United States pose an unacceptable national security risk to the United States. It is the policy of the United States to ensure the total elimination of these organizations' presence in the United States and their ability to threaten the territory, safety, and security of the United States through their extraterritorial command and control structures, thereby protecting the American people and the territorial integrity of the United States." Now, one thing to keep in mind here when they're talking about moving these cartels from essentially criminal organizations as they're viewed to terrorist organizations, what that does is it unlocks a lot of capabilities in the United States government to go after these bad actors, whether it's the entities themselves or the people in or running those organizations. And it's not just military. It does open up some military possibilities, something that both sides of the political spectrum are talking more about, whether they view it as a good thing or a bad thing. But there's a lot of legal and financial issues here as well. We treat terrorism very different than criminal activity. So that's one of the things that this designation would do. Now, jumping into some opinions and responses, starting with the right side of the political spectrum here. Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas and chair of the Senate Intel Committee, said, quote, "Cartels are responsible for poisoning our streets and killing thousands of Americans each year with drugs like fentanyl. Designating them as terrorists reflects the reality of their operations and gives us the tools to dismantle them." Again, so more than just military, but also the financial and legal other tools at the U.S. disposal. House Speaker Mike Johnson argued that the order would provide, quote, "the long overdue framework to cut off cartel funding and cripple their operations." Former Secretary of State and former Director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, who's not currently in government service, said, quote, "For too long, these cartels have operated with impunity, wreaking havoc on both sides of the border. This designation signals that their days of hiding in the shadows are over," end quote. Incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, former Green Beret, said, quote, "Cartels are not just a border issue, they're a national security threat. They fund global criminal enterprises and undermine governments. This step ensures we treat them as the terrorists that they are," end quote. Now, there was also, or in a kind of broader context, like a summary from a generally right-leaning organization, looking at the Wall Street Journal here, they highlighted that this terrorist designation generally aligns with what we've seen as a lot of Republican calls to prioritize border security and confront the overall fentanyl crisis here in the United States. Then turning to some opinions and responses from the left side of the political spectrum, starting with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a congresswoman from New York. She said, quote, "Labeling cartels as terrorist organizations might sound tough, but it's a simplistic solution to a complex problem. This could escalate violence in Mexico, create diplomatic friction, and even endanger asylum seekers fleeing cartel violence." We then have Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, who said, quote, that the order could blur the lines between criminal activity and terrorism, making it harder to implement effective, targeted policies. We have Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico, who highlighted the concerns about the impact on border communities in the United States, saying, quote, "Many families living along the border already face daily threats from cartel violence. This designation could increase the risks they face and hinder cross-border commerce and cooperation. The Center for American Progress issued a statement saying, quote, "While the intent of this order is understandable, its broad application could lead to significant humanitarian and legal challenges. We urge the administration to focus on comprehensive reform rather than punitive measures." And then immigration rights activist Linda Sanchez said, quote, "This executive order does little to address the root causes of migration and violence. It's a Band-Aid solution that could harm vulnerable populations rather than protect them." And then the last direct quote here we have is from Human Rights Watch, actually, who they said that this designation could set a dangerous precedent by, quote, "Using counterterrorism laws against cartels, the U.S. risks normalizing military-style interventions in regions already suffering from violence and instability." And then kind of the overall summary from the New York Times was focused more on the diplomatic fallout with Mexico, talking about how this could be viewed by Mexican authorities and the president of Mexico as overreach by the United States government. Now, a couple things to keep an eye out for here in the coming days, weeks, and months. For starters, this isn't something that's going to happen like right now. It's going to take a little while, 14 days to be specific, or no more than 14 days to get started. Going back to the text of the executive order, it says, quote, "Within 14 days of the date of this order, the Secretary of State shall take all appropriate action in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence to make a recommendation regarding the designation of any cartel or other organization described in Section 1 of this order as a foreign terrorist organization." And then a couple things worth watching out for. First and foremost, legal challenges, because that's what we do here in the United States. Anytime there's any executive order or law, it seems like it's met with a flurry of legal challenges. Not entirely sure the direction that those would come from at this point, but again, just based off historical precedent, it's going to be there in one shape or another. The next big one here is the diplomatic response. As of this recording, we really haven't heard much from Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. She has historically expressed concern about this designation and how it could harm and strain U.S.-Mexico relations, but as of this executive order signing really just a couple hours ago, haven't seen anything new out of Mexico. And then the last piece here, kind of a question on everyone's mind, is what implementation would look like. How does this connect with the military, both the military that might be serving overseas, as in Mexico to some degree, the National Guard, or maybe even active duty troops on the U.S. side of the border? Down south, we've got the Department of Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, the Director of National Intelligence, which includes all of the intelligence agencies, the Department of Justice, and more. So how is this going to shake out? Who's going to take responsibility? Who's going to take point to really see this thing through? And what will it actually look like as this process plays out of these cartels and their individuals being labeled as foreign terrorist organizations? Now, I hope that was helpful. A few years ago, I signed up to a newsletter called The Flip Side that I'm not even sure if they're still operating. If they are, I'll link them in the description below because it's kind of like the inspiration. I loved what they did. They would take 3 or 4 times a week a topic in U.S. domestic politics and say, here's the issue. Here's the responses from the left side of the aisle. Here's the responses from the right side of the aisle. And maybe there'd be like a libertarian view in there as well. And just direct quotes. So like you could see what both sides were saying about a specific topic. And that's my intent here. I'm going to try to do that with some national security focused topics here going forward. But interested in your thoughts. Is that helpful at all? My goal is that maybe it kind of cuts through a lot of the confusion and a lot of the just name calling or sound clips that make it out into the news. But anyways, that's the idea here. Hope it was helpful, but that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.